Well, welcome back to the Dark Mods New Mappers workshop. I'm Springheel, and in lesson 5 we're going to be looking at how to take the rooms that you create and connect them to each other. So I've got my one room here that I created earlier, and you've got a few options when it comes to creating your next room. You can use prefabs and do the same steps that we used here, or if you prefer, you can copy and paste things you've already done. So I'm going to have a room that I want to look very similar to this one. So I'm actually going to just select all the pieces of this room that I want to keep for the next room. And I could do even clicking on art, clicking on lights if I wanted to keep them. I'm going to make the next room a little bit shorter though. I don't want it to be quite as long. So I'm not going to select these end pieces here. I'm just going to select these. Oh, that's still one entire, I haven't ungrouped that, so that's one grouped thing. We'll leave that for the time being. And I will select, not that light, select the ceiling and select the floor. And then I'm going to hit space to clone. I'm going to switch to translate just so I don't shift left or right. And I'm going to drag this down something like this, and if I follow with the camera, you can see now I have a room just like this, already with a light in it. Now these pieces are a little bit further away. We've got to close that gap, so still on translate, I'm just going to slide them forward like that until it looks like they overlap. You can see the dashed line here means that they're overlapping a bit. I'm just going to move it in a little further just to be sure. And now we have our duplicate, smaller room. The ceiling now is too high because we did not copy these, I don't know, whatever you call those pieces. I was going to look that up. So I can either add those in. Actually, let's do that. I'll hit clone. And translate like this. Position it so it looks about right. I know it's at the right height. And then right click, ungroup, and that will allow me to delete the last two end pieces here. And then I can take the remaining ones and move them forward. And that looks about right. And there you go. So very quickly we've created an entirely new room. It didn't take much time at all. Now we don't have any ceiling geometry yet. I could do the same thing I did here and just copy and paste that ceiling geometry too if I wanted, but I'm not going to do that just yet. Once you get more than a couple rooms here, it's easy to start getting a little disoriented when you're trying to move from one to the other. So it's worth noting that if you need to find a particular room, you can hold down Control and push your middle mouse button, and that will move the camera to whatever location you are pointing at when you click it. That's kind of a useful tip. Now we need to shrink the ceiling and floor brushes here. We've shrunk our room, but you can see the brushes really stick out into space there, and we want to fix that. So we're going to take this brush, switch to the resize option, and we'll drag that with the left mouse. And again, we want it to be pretty close to the edge there. You can see there's a bit of a gap. I obviously didn't place this exactly, so I'm going to left click in the middle, shift it just a bit so that I know it's overlapping each side there, and then bring up S, our texture window. And we're going to do the same fit method we did before. This is a room that's a little bit more square, so maybe a 5 by 5 might look about right. No, I'll try a 6 by 6. Fit, and yeah, that's pretty good. All right, now the floor is a little bit easier because we won't have to change the texture. So left click outside, drag it in, and we'll drag it into about there for now. Alright, so we have our room more or less complete now. Let's do our ceiling brush around here as well. I'm just going to check the grid. Oh yeah, see, I have a lower grid than I should be for building anything with brushes. So I'll put it back up to 8, and I'm going to make make a wall, or make a brush rather, make sure it's tall enough. I want it to be above the ceiling. We'll put it about the same height as the other ceiling brushes. Move this one down, put it up to about there. And then we want to give it a texture. If it doesn't have a texture, it will not seal. The texture you give it doesn't matter, although I think picking a texture that you know stands out is probably not a bad idea, just so that you can see if it's sticking somewhere that it's not. I'm going to pick some kind of shiny gold texture there. Let's do that. I know I didn't do that before, but thinking about it further, it makes sense to have this be very, very visible. I can see I'm a little close to the wall here, so I'm just going to move this out a little further so that when it hollows it, hopefully it won't stick through the wall. So now when I zoom into the room, if anything sticks through, it should be very visible, like it is in the doorway there. But I don't see anything sticking through, so we're good. So another thing it might be useful to know how to do is to make your own prefabs, because going in and individually clicking each part of the room that you want to keep can be a little time consuming. So we're going to do this. If you hold down Shift, drag a selection box out, it'll select everything that's touched by your selection box. So now we have everything in this room, including all of the ceiling brushwork around the outside. Right click. Oh, actually, sorry, it's not right click, it's over here. Go to File, and then Save Selected as Prefab. So if you do that, and I think you should save them, what would be the best spot? It's not really, a prefab is not something that really has to be packaged with your mission at all, so it probably makes the most sense to put them in the prefab folder that already exists. You can either put them in an individual folder if you want, or just in the main prefabs folder. I'm just going to call this 3x3 room. Now, if I want to then duplicate this room, I should just have to right click, insert prefab, and if I close these windows and scroll down to the bottom, I don't see it, right? But that's because I already had Dark Radiant open, so you got to rescan prefab folders. Now when I scroll down, there it is, 3x3 room. And now I can drop that in to my map and easily rotate it. If I wanted to say be a room on the other side of the hallway or something, and it becomes a very, very quick and easy procedure to clone that and move it around as much as I want. So keep in mind you can design your own prefabs and save them quite easily. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is start connecting these rooms. Right now we have a bunch of separate rooms, which does not help very much when it comes to getting around. So we're going to have these rooms connected by hallways. So I'm going to first look for prefab hallways. I happen to know that there are a few mansion ones, a 4x4 hallway, so I'm going to take that and hit OK and move that prefab into position so that it is the same height as the other modules. And one other thing I'm going to do, and this is a good time to do it, is show you how to make layers, because you can create different layers in Dark Radiant, which is a useful way of keeping things separate and keeping them very easy to select. Now, because this hallway, I'm going to want to move around quite a bit after I've ungrouped it. So I'm going to need to ungroup it so I can select individual parts, but I'm still going to want to select the whole thing very quickly. So I'm going to put that on a new layer. So Control L will bring up your layers window. Right now you can see we just have a default. You can see the instructions there tell you that if you click that, it'll select everything in that layer. So right now I've now selected everything in the map because everything's on the default layer. I'm going escape to deselect. So I'm going to make a new layer, and I'm going to call it hallway. And now I'm going to click on my prefab hallway. I'm going to right click, and I'm going to put move to layer hallway. So now if you click these layer visibility windows, I can turn off everything but the hallway layer. Now I just have the hall. Or I can click the hall and quickly select just this. So we have a hallway here. Now, one of the trickiest parts of working with modules, they're great for making really fast rooms and making really fast hallways and exteriors and things like that. But there is one part where they become a little finicky, and that's when you're trying to line up doorways or any other kind of entry point. So what I'm going to do on here, I've got the hallway selected. I'm going to ungroup it, and then I'm going to go into my main room by going to Control and then the middle mouse click to put my camera in there, and I'm going to select this doorway, and then I'm going to select. Oh, I've already ungrouped it. I should have. Oh well, should have done this first. Okay. Let's hide all of the brushwork for the moment. So we're going to filter brushes so I can see through here. So I'm going to select this, and I'm going to select this. These are the two pieces that have to line up, and you can see right now they do not line up. So that means I need to shift the entire hallway. Now if I had to go back and actually, I could select it with this, or I could just hold down Shift and draw this. Although see how it actually unselects the piece that was selected. But Shift click will bring that back on. And now I'm going to move the entire thing down. Oops, don't want to move this one. Don't want to move this one. So I'll move the entire thing down. Let's actually get rid of all the extra stuff. I'll select that door again, Shift, Control, H. Let's hide everything else. And then I can see exactly where the edge of this one is. And by clicking this, I can see the edges there. So I've gone one square too far. Move that back up, and now I can see that those two line up perfectly. Now this is still a wall. So the next step is going to be to make this a door piece. Choose model, and we'll make it the same door. Actually, let's not do it this way. Let's use the shortcut. I know I like this door model here, so I'll just click on model so it selects it here. I'll click on this and hit the check mark, and it immediately turns it into that model. So now we can see we have a doorway through here, but you can see that there's still quite a gap here. So we still have to do some moving of the hallway. And here's where it's useful to just be able to do that and select the entire hall. I'm going to use the translate tool because I have this lined up the way that I want. I don't want to accidentally shift it. And then I'm going to move this closer. Now, these door modules are designed to be able to go together a little bit and overlap a little bit without creating Z-fighting, but not a huge amount. If you decide that you need these further apart, so if for some reason you needed them that far apart and they don't touch, well then they're either, you can either do one of two things. You can make brushes that fill that gap, and then you texture them with a texture that looks like that walnut, and just do that on either side. Or there are door frame models that you could put in there to fill in that gap. I'm going to see if I can get them close enough. Let's get my hallway selected. I'm going to see if I can get them close enough so that I don't have to fill the gap with anything. And then if we, okay, so they're touching. It looks like they are overlapping just enough there. And I don't see an obvious gap here, although we'll have to check it again to be sure. So I'm going to assume that those are close enough, which means now that my hallway is perfectly in position. Now we're going to find something probably that we don't like when I turn off the brush filter. Oh, and unhide. Shift H. Yeah. Okay, now here's the problem. our ceiling brushwork around this room is sticking through the hall. So that is a bit of a problem. So what do we do about that? Well, we're already on the translate tool, which is good because it won't let us accidentally shift it up or down, which means we cannot open any leaks if we move this in. So we're going to move it in and see if we can get it right in between so that it's not sticking through either wall. So I don't see anything. Oh, I see something poking through there, but that's a different brush. Nothing poking through there. Scoot inside. I don't see anything poking through there, so that's okay. This, escape to deselect, this is that piece. So we can't use the translate. Well, I guess we could use the translate tool, but I don't really want to move it. I just want to shrink it. Let's filter out all the entities now. And you can see that these pieces all stick out a little bit further than they need to now because we moved this piece in. So let's just shrink all the other ones. We'll go to resize. I'm going to select all of the... I'm not going to select the actual visible floor, but I will select the parts that are ceiling brushwork. And then I'm going to hold Shift. Oh wait, sorry, left click, hold Shift, and then kind of drag it in like that. And now, if I turn the filter off, you cannot see that brush sticking through anymore. Okay, so hit escape. Okay, so now we have a hallway. We have, or at least part of a hallway. We have our doors lining up, but we have this solid wall here. So how do we get rid of that? Luckily, this part is fairly easy. So we're going to select both sides of the door, both door models, and Control-Shift-H, hide everything else. And then over here, we can close this layer window for now. Over here, select this, and if you go to this XY button up here and click it, oh, why did it do this one when this was the one that was selected? Okay, I guess for some reason clicking the top doesn't seem to select it. For this, you've got to actually click inside the window. Okay, so we've turned this, and what this does is it just rotates it, so you can see from the front, from the top, from the side. So we're going to look from the front. I'm just going to put this one back to the top. And there. Okay, so the reason we want to be able to see this from the front is so we can do this. We're going to Shift click to select the brush, and then we're going to go to this tool, the clipper tool, and click that. And the clipper tool is a very powerful tool for cutting brushes up. So what we're going to do is if you want to click on your grid lines, usually at an intersection, and we're going to click 1, and then we'll say click up here, 2, and see how it makes a straight line connecting those 2 points. We have just tentatively cut the brush in half. To keep that cut though, if I just click somewhere else, we'll lose this cut. We haven't committed to it yet. To commit to it, you want to hold Shift and Enter. Now it has cut that brush. So if we deselect and then click again, you can see now we're only selecting up to here because this is now a separate brush. This part is a different brush. So let's do this again. Clipper tool, left click 1, left click 2, and it will cut all the way through in a straight line the brush that you have selected. Shift Enter to keep it. Now we can just select the middle part here. You could do this and just go to your resize tool and lift this up, and then we can see through it. But we can actually save a step if we don't do that. Highlight the center brush, go again. You want to make sure you're in the visible model. The reason we're cutting it a little bit back from the edge is that we don't want to accidentally see any of the brush. So we're going to cut back here. So I'm going to click once, click again. I'll show you what happens if you click wrong. Hold on. Let's say I did this. It's hard to click wrong when you have a big grid like this, but on a smaller grid, you could accidentally make a diagonal one, say, oh, I don't want that, what do I do? And then you click over here, and things start to get weird. just deselect, click off the clipper tool and click back on it. That's the easiest way to clear it if you make a mistake that I know of. So we'll click here, click again. Oh, sorry. We did something wrong there. This is, if you click that and like, where's my line? It's because we didn't select anything. So, and now when we select it, it's not going to work because we already had those points clicked. So we click off, click back on. So we have our brush selected. Click 1, click 2, Shift Enter, select. Now we've got just this brush isolated. And here's where we can save ourselves a little bit of time, because this is a perfectly sized brush that fits in our doorway. It's flush with our ceiling geometry. It's a perfect candidate for a viz portal. So we're just going to right click, go to Make Viz Portal, and there you go. Now, viz portals, one side of them, if I zip outside, will look like this. One face looks like this. All the other faces will show no draw. So don't worry about that. And when I hit escape, it disappears because I have viz portals filtered off. Just because I like to be able to see through the doors. Okay, so we shift unclick, we shift H to unhide everything. And now you can see we've got a doorway leading into the hallway. Now the hallway does not have any ceiling geometry. It also doesn't have a visible floor or a visible ceiling. So we're going to do that fairly simply here by just doing this. We're going to click this brush, make sure we're on the resize tool, and we're just going to drag this brush out like this, so that it goes all the way to the other side of the hall. Now, I don't really want the wood to be going this direction, so I'm going to use the clipper tool again, and I'm going to clip somewhere in between the two walls, like this. I clip 1. Oops, sorry, I deselected by accident. Clip 1, clip 2, Shift Enter. Now this brush in the hallway is a separate brush. So I can now drag this and continue it further on. And I can do unique things to the texture. For example, I'm going to hit S to bring up the texture tool. We're going to rotate, by clicking this twice, these boards so that now they go in a direction that's parallel with the hallway. Now, if you are really specific about your textures, this can bother you that now there is this weird cut off part here. So I'm going to use the horizontal shift just to move this up so that the dark line is there and it looks like that's the edge of a board, and then it's switching to boards of a different direction there. I'm not too worried about whether it lines up over there. Okay, so we're making progress. Okay, so we don't have any ceiling geometry around this hallway yet. We also don't have a visible ceiling, so I think we will put the visible ceiling on first. Now, there's nothing wrong with just putting a simple brush on here. There was somebody, the dark one, was asking about what to do if the models don't reach the height of your visible ceiling. And so I thought I'd show you one method to fix that using brushes. We're just going to put a simple brush horizontal spacer in here. So let's say that we drew our visible, our ceiling first. In fact, you know what? We've got a lot going on here. So let's bring up our layer window, Control L, and we're going to hide all the default. Now see what just happened is the brush we were making just disappeared. So let's click back on that brush and we'll move it to hallway, and then we will turn off the default layer. And so now we can only see the brush in the hallway, nothing else will get in our way. So let's say that our visible brush, our visible ceiling rather, was that high, so there was a gap between there. And let's just throw a texture on here. If you go to your texture panel, you'll see all the textures you've already used in the map somewhere. And I think we'll just put this on for the time being. So how do you fill this gap? Well, one way you can do it is by drawing simple, small, horizontal brushes. And you can move them down so that they touch or overlap the models and they touch the ceiling, and that will fill in that space. And once you have one the way that you like it, it's pretty easy to clone it. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time getting this one the way that I want it. So, whoops, backed up too far. So I want to put some kind of, you know what, that actually doesn't look that bad with that texture up there. But I'm going to show you some textures that will be useful to know about. Go to Dark Mod, Wood, and Panels. You'll see some that are called Trim. Here's a few. And these are meant to be used on long, thin brushes for the most part, to add a little bit of decorative stuff. So let's just say we tried this one. Now the scale there doesn't work. We really want it to fit at least horizontally. So let's go to our texture tool, and I forget which is X and which is Y. Nope, other way. So yeah, something like that. We'll see how many times we want it to fit. That looks pretty good to me, so let's just leave it like that. Now that fills the gap nicely. Now underneath here you can see a little bit of that lip. If I just select that face, you can see that sticks out. That's a little weird looking. I don't like that on the bottom there. So I'm going to just shift this to see if I can get it to a spot where, there, it's mostly flat. Good. Okay, and that should be fine. All right, let's just copy that, clone it, and we'll try just translating it to the other side. And hey, yeah, it looks good from the other side too. Now the bottom doesn't work. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to, instead of trying to mess around with the texture, I'm just going to rotate it so that now this part that I already have the way I want it is the part that's sticking, oops, out. There. And we could do the same thing up there. So we'll draw a brush here. If you notice the brush, when you start drawing a brush, it starts it at the same height as the last brush that you drew or moved, so which can be convenient. Missed it. That's right. I want to go to the Move tool, and I want to drag that forward, move this one out. Oh, and because I've got this selected, all new brushes I draw are going to use that texture. I'm going to try something here. Here's a new thing. If I want to put the same texture on here, how do I get it so that it's the same width? I did this by fitting it 4 times. This tile's 4 times this way as the brush goes along, but I can't do the same thing here. If I have 4 times here, it's going to be way too compressed. It's not going to match. So how do I try to match the same scale on here? So Control Shift click to get one side of the brush, one face, go to Edit, and go to Copy Shader. And that will copy the scale of the shader on there. And then if I Shift click on this face and go up to Edit, Paste Shader, I should get exactly the same scale. So you can see that this looks exactly the same. Now if I really wanted to worry about it a lot, I could then select this and try to shift this over so that it actually matches, although it won't match on both sides. So I'm not really going to worry too much about that right now. But that's how you do that if you want to try to copy the shader exactly. So we've got our visible parts of the hallway done now, but we need to seal it. We've got a ceiling geometry around it. And we don't need an entire box now because we do have one wall, this one here, already set. So what we're going to do is, again, we will draw another box around here. And let's go to our gold texture because that's what we decided we're going to use. Let's hide all the entities for the time being. And we want to move this brush over so that it's just overlapping that ceiling brush. That's the brush we cut. There's the holes for the doorway. So we want this to be overlapping it. Here we want to be as close to the wall as we can. Let's turn the entities back on. Okay, so we want to be, I guess not as close as we can. We want to be about an 8, 1 grid away. Because when this becomes a room, when we hollow it out, it's going to make this brush 8 units thick, or 1 square thick. So we want room for that. And down at this end, we're not going to worry too much. What about our height? We want to match the height of the rest of the ceiling geometry for now. So that's okay. So let's go to hollow. There. Now, we're going to have an extra wall along this. Oops, let's go inside. There. So we're inside our hallway. So now if we look over here, we've got an extra wall here. This wall that we cut through is now blocked again. So we're just going to completely delete that one. And let's hide. Oops. So I'm using the mouse wheel and it's moving me in and out of the hallway. We'll hide these two units here. And we'll stretch this wall out until it reaches and overlaps this one. And let's make this gold while we're at it so we know it is a ceiling piece of brushwork, and then unhide, and we're back to that. Okay. Now, if we demapped this, we should be able to move from the room into the hall. So let's see if we've done this correctly. Okay, well, let's see whether this works or not. So demap man 1. Looks good. Okay, let's go and test our map then. Okay, so here's our room. Wow, still really ugly. I moved the chair a little bit, but man, those shadows are ugly. Do something about that. That might be a model problem. Okay, so I'm going to turn on my lantern here. I like having the player lantern. It helps you look and see what things look like in the darker areas. So we've got our nice doorway here. Now let's look. Is there a gap? No, there is not. So everything looks pretty good. Now we will eventually probably put a door in there, but for now, everything looks good. So we step out here. Let's see where our wood changes. Looks great. And now we're out in our hallway. Now, we didn't change any skins or anything out here. Probably will at some point because that looks weird. But now we can see what our hallway looks like, or at least what it looks like in ambient light because we didn't put any lights in here. Now, what if you want to take from here, for example, I can't see the ceiling. Can't see what that trim looks like that we put on. My lantern doesn't go far enough. So if you put the console on, which for me is the Control Alt and apostrophe key or tilde key, and type no clip, now you can kind of fly around your map. So I can fly up here. Now it does make the lantern pulse for some reason when you're in no clip mode. Just try to ignore that. But zip up here and look at the trim, and yeah, you know what? It does not look too bad at all. Makes it look just that much fancier. Maybe I'll want to change the ceiling brush because I think those boards are way too thin, but I didn't really put much thought into that. Now, you can also, if you wish, fly through walls in this mode, so we can zip through into those other rooms we made. See, this one already has a light in it because we copied the light, which means, actually, if we go out here, this one will have a light in it because we copied the light as part of our prefab. So we already have these other rooms floating around in space out here, so we really need to go back to the map and extend this hallway so it connects to those rooms. So I'm going to speed up this next step a little bit because we don't need to see every detail of it. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is isolate the hallway that we just created so that I can select it and turn it into a prefab. And that way I can place it in several other places, and the ceiling geometry and the trim and everything will already be there for us. So I might as well make that ceiling geometry gold as well, and I noticed there was a little bit of a gap there in the ceiling geometry. It didn't affect us yet, but it would have eventually. So with everything else hidden, I can now select the entire hallway and make that into a prefab. Okay, so next I'm going to drop that prefab in there. Now remember, the important thing when working with modules is that the door frames, the door modules, the entry points, or windows, if you're doing a window entry point, have to line up. And so I could have moved the room to make sure they lined up, but I'm going to leave the room where it is and just shift the hallway. So I can see both models quite well, so I move them together. A little bit too close as it turns out. Now I'm going to delete the brush from the room. I won't need that anymore. And just leave the brush from the hallway because that already has the doorway cut out. But it's a little bit too close. So I'm actually going to have to go down to a grid of 4 to get those doorways close enough that they touch without overlapping too much. And there we go. So our hallways are connected. At least the hallway is connected to that room. And none of our ceiling geometry is showing through the walls now where it's not supposed to be. Now we have this junction area where these two hallways meet and overlap. Obviously we can't leave them like that. So we're going to put a bend in the hallway here. We're going to have a little bit of a corner. That's good for viz portaling. Corners are useful to block lines of sight. But obviously things aren't going to snap together here, so we're going to have to use pillars to hide gaps between the walls and gaps or overlaps where things match. So I'm going to clone an archway model, bring that down so that there's one at the end of the hall. And then I'm going to take a couple wall pieces and start building the corner. Alright, I'm going to filter out all the brushes just to get them out of the way. And then that archway there, that lower of the two, is a little bit too close. There's no room for the bend there, so I'm going to have to move that down. I'm using the translate tool here so that I know it's not going to shift to the side. Now in this area there's not enough room to fit full-sized walls, so we're going to have to do a little adjusting here to make everything fit. I'm going to start by importing a couple half-wall models. Most of the module sets have half walls to help with spacing. And then I'll move that into position. Usually there's a left and right half wall. They're designed to tile properly on either side of a full wall piece. Often when you're adding new model pieces onto something that's already there, you'll have to adjust the grid and perhaps snap your model to the grid in order to get it to attach properly. Models usually slide off the grid when they're rotated, so any model that you rotate will probably need to be snapped back to the grid before positioning. Okay, so we have most of our spaces filled now in this corner, but you can see that there's an obvious gap there. And this is where pillar pieces come into play. They're designed to fill those corners so that there's no gaps. Now if you have the option to use a corner piece, pick that in a corner. It's usually designed so that there's only two sides, just saves on a few polys. There are some places where you'll need the full pillar. I'm going to use one here to join the wall up to the archway here. So then I'm going to clone that half wall and move it over to the other side. And it takes a little bit of adjusting to get it to fit. The good news about all these joints is that you can hide edges, so you can actually let your modules overlap there if you need to sort of finesse the positioning. Now the way those line up, we might even be able to get away without a pillar there, but I think just for balance, we'll put one on that side as well. That pillar was clipping into some of the woodwork a little bit too much for my taste, so I'm just going to shift things over. Again, because that wall is buried in the arch model, we can move it side to side without having to worry about the edge. So there's one more gap to fill, so we just clone another pillar, move it over there, position it in place. And there we go. Now we have the visible facade of our corner done, but now we have to deal with the ceiling brushwork. So if we turn the brushes back on, we can see that there's a bit of a mess there. We're going to have to clean up how those two intersect. First, I'm going to grab that one brush and slide it down into the archway. I know I'm going to make a viz portal there eventually, and I'll be able to use that brush. So I've got all my layers visible at the moment, and if you notice, there's this one little brush here that is not gold. It looks like it's that walnut texture, and you might wonder, what the heck is that? Well, that's a little mistake I made. I thought I would fill you in on it, just in case it happens to you. A few moments ago, I selected this archway module and moved it down, slid it down using the translate tool. And what I forgot was that this prefab actually comes with two little brushes right in there just to fill in any little gap between the hall wall and the module piece. And when I slid this, I did not slide the brushes. So I'm going to go to the translate tool and I'm going to slide those brushes down as well so that they're where they're supposed to be. Now there should be another one on the other side, but at the moment I can't see it. So I'm just going to click that and hide it. And there it is. So you see the value in having your ceiling brushes be some texture you know you aren't going to use, so that if you ever see a brush like this, you know that it's something that is important and needs to be moved. Okay, so now we'll unhide everything and go back to doing what we were doing, which is getting rid of all this ceiling brushwork that's in places we don't want it to be. So we're going to go to the resize tool. We're going to grab this, left click. Now see how there's only the one blue dot here. If I hold shift now, even if my mouse drifts to the side, although it's moving the texture, interestingly, it will not move or resize the model. So it will only resize the model up and down. So I like to hold on to shift just to be a little bit more careful with my resizing. And I'm going to move this down to here so that it lines up. Actually, I'm going to move that further. I don't want it to line up with that. Eventually we're going to move that too. So we'll move that down to about maybe there. This piece obviously we don't want, so let's translate it down to about here. And we will resize this into about, I don't know, there. And then we've got to grab this brush and we will resize that down here. I'm going to overlap the corners just to be on the safe side. And it's basically just this dance of grabbing things that you shouldn't see, moving them back behind the visible facade, behind the visible models. Why is that? Oh, there's something poking through there. We're going to have to deal with that. And move that back a little bit. Okay, so at the moment, we're starting to look a little better. Still some problems, obviously. At a certain point, you're probably going to want to filter all the entities out so that you can just deal with the brushwork and start sealing holes. Now here's where this trim, see how the trim is there, our sealing, our CEI sealing brush is up there. And that gets in our way a little bit. So something that I like to do, especially on brushes that the AI can never walk on, like ceilings, is to select them and turn them into what's called a func static. And if you right click and go down to here, you can convert to func static. Now func static, I don't know what the best way to explain it is. This takes this and turns it into essentially an entity, which is different than world spawn. If you go to your entity window here and click on a brush, it just says world spawn. And there's no fields to type anything else in there. You cannot add properties, generally speaking, to world spawn. The entity, if you click on there, see it already has things. You can give it a specific name. You can give it other qualities. You could put, for example, no shadows if you didn't want it to cast shadows, or do other things with it. So I'm also going to grab this and this and this. You can put multiple brushes into a func static at the same time. And now the reason that I do that, or like to do that, is this. If I go back to filter, turn the entity filter off and then back on again, those things are now gone. And so this allows me, if I do that for all, I like to turn all the visible brushwork, all the brushwork I actually want the player to see, anything that's decorative, into a func static. Because then when I do the filter, it will be gone and I'm only left looking at my ceiling brushwork. Now I'm not going to do that to the floors, because one of the things about func statics or entities is that there are specific rules about when AI will walk on them and when they won't. So for the moment, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to turn these into func statics. Also, it's important to note that func statics do not seal. So if I turned this wall into a func static, it would be the same as deleting it as far as the engine's concerned, and I would now have a big leak out to the void. So you got to make sure you never do that to your ceiling brushes. But that's not sealing, SEA sealing, and neither is that. Actually, I don't know what that is. Oh, I think that's a decorative piece above the... Actually, that might be sealing. I'm going to leave that because I can't remember if it's sealing or not. But I am going to take those, turn that into a func static so that we can get rid of them. And now I can go about trying to piece together. I'm just going to hide the floors just to get them out of the way. Now I've got to piece together all this gold stuff. This, I believe, is the outside. Let's scoot to the outside of the map here. Yeah, that's the outside room that we didn't turn to gold initially, so let's do that now. Because we want to get a really good look at anything that is not supposed to be visible by the players. This is a ceiling CEI, ceiling brush, so we're going to turn that to a func static, and we'll do the same thing in here, and then we'll go back to hiding all the entities. Wait, didn't we do this one? I thought we did. Nope, I guess we did not. I hope we didn't do something to a func static that we didn't mean to. Yeah, we did. We did the actual SEA sealing brush here. Okay, well, here's how you undo that. Let's scoop up here. This must be our sealing brush, our SEA sealing. Boy, that's annoying. Those two words are the same. So we want to revert it to world spawn, right click, revert to world spawns right there. So it's very easy to turn that back. Let's make that gold so we don't get confused any further. And now go to filter all entities. All right, sit back in here. Okay, now we're looking good. Okay, so now the trick is to fill in any holes. So we're going to move this like this. Now, I don't know if you can really see how the textures there are kind of fighting back and forth. That's called Z fighting, and it's because these two brushes overlap on exactly the same plane. Probably it's better mapping to fix that, but I've honestly never noticed any problem with, I don't know that Z fighting does anything as far as the engine's concerned. I don't think it cares about sealing brushwork. It's only a visible problem. And if it's only a visible problem and the player can never see it, I don't know if there's a compelling reason to fix it. Okay, so here we need this wall to go over here so that it closes this off. This is the wall we're going to cut through in a moment. And are there any other gaps? Yeah, we have the top wall to do here, so we'll move that up to the same spot, and we'll move this down to the same spot. And that should seal everything. Let's just hide that floor to make sure there's no gaps in the doorway. Okay, so far so good. So let's take a look in here. That looks sealed. And if we hide the floor, I don't see any gaps in the doorway, so it looks like everything should work. We just have to deal with cutting a hole in this one wall. And let's turn our filter off, grab the arch model, select it, and Control-Shift-H to hide everything else. And now this is doing just what we did before with the clipper tool. So let's hide our layers, click here, change it so that we're looking at it straight on, go to the clipper tool. Now we've got to make sure that the brush is selected for this to work. And now we'll zip in and Shift Enter, Shift Enter, and at the top, Shift Enter. Then we'll select this, right click, make Viz Portal. So now we have a Viz Portal. It disappears because our Viz Portals are filtered off at the moment, but that has made a nice little Viz Portal inside this choke point that's created by that archway. Now I'd like to zip in here and just make sure that the brushwork isn't visible. It's not sticking through. Good. Okay, so let's unhide everything. Now, one last thing we did not do was deal with the visible floor. So the visible floor needs to go all the way to the bottom. Oops, gotta go back to our move tool, or resize rather. Needs to go at least that far. And this needs to go at least that far. But here we have Z-fighting that must be fixed. So obviously we cannot have this visible texture like that. So we need to make sure that these two textures don't overlap. This is another place where the clipper tool becomes very useful. Let's get the two textures and hide everything else. So if I select this texture, scroll in a little bit, go to the clipper and clip right on top, Shift Enter. That now splits it into two brushes. Go down here, do the same thing, 1, 2. Oh, okay, see what this just did? It's going to cut that one in half too. It's not necessarily a problem, but I didn't really want to cut that one in half. So I'm going to go back to my clipper tool, deselect that. If you have more than one brush selected, it cuts all of them. So I'll cut that, unhide. Now if I click on there, I'm going to see, let's scroll out a bit, I've got that one. I'm just going to hide that for a minute so that I can select this piece. There, that's the thin overlapping piece. I'm going to delete that and then unhide the floor. And now it should merge. Now, there's one little thing, if it bothers you. These textures, see how there's an obvious gap there in the textures. The textures obviously don't line up. So what do we do about that? Well, this is a perfect place to use that thing we learned, copy and paste shader. So Control-Shift-Click to click on just this face. Go up to Edit, Copy Shader, click here, Edit, Paste Shader. And now if you see, it matches exactly. And when we deselect, you won't be able to see that there was any transition there at all. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing to the ceiling that I did to the floor, but I'm just going to speed that up since there's not much point in watching it. One thing I will note is that I had to take those func statics that I made and convert them back to world spawn. You can move func statics, but you can't resize them. So I noticed that there was still a ceiling brush clipping through the wall there. So I took it and just moved it back slightly and moved the wall forward until it could no longer be seen. So then I had to make some new trim pieces to go around this corner area. Continued to make a lot of use of the copy and paste shader tools. So I continued to resize and place trim until there was trim all the way along the top, and clipped the ceiling brushes the same way that I had done the floor so that there was no Z-fighting. Then I just quickly grabbed the skin line from one of the pieces inside the room and then applied that to all the models in the hallway. And with that, we're ready to test it in game. Luckily the map demaps alright, so we don't have to go back and look for any leaks, but it would be fairly easy to find them, I think, especially once we filtered out all the entities. And so once you drop into your map, using the player lantern, you can see that the hallway is pretty good looking. I dropped a few decorative pieces and a light that I cloned from one of the rooms into the bend in the hallway just so that you can see what it looks like. That one panel looks a little off-center. I think I'll probably shift that over at some point. But in general, I think it looks pretty good, and we now have access from one room to the next. Well, this video has gone on a little bit longer than I had planned, so I'm going to wrap it up here. We have learned a number of things this lesson, and we've learned enough now that you have the tools to create your entire region. You can create your rooms, you can connect them with corridors, you can decorate them, you can add your lights. Eventually we will get into adding AI and special things like readables and loot and things like that. I think the next lesson we will look at outdoor settings. But until then, go ahead and work on finishing any of your indoor regions. As always, if you've got any questions, feel free to ask in the forums. And until next time, happy mapping!